Hey, boys and girls. So right now we are going to review fractions. We'll take a look at linear fractions like line fractions and also fractions on a shape. And let's pretend this red rectangle here is a licorice strip. And you wanted to split that licorice strip between two people, like you and a friend. And let's say it is a foot long or 12 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that licorice strip into two equal parts, or half. And as you can see, half of the licorice strip, if we measured it, is equal to 6 inches. So you and your friend would each get 6 inches. Each side of this is a half. If you put them together, it's two halves, which is the same as one whole, which is equivalent to a whole. If we were just partitioning a circle, like let's say this was like a cookie or something, okay, here's a half, and here's a half. Two of those would make a whole. So we're going to skip thirds now, and we're going to go to fourths. And the reason why I like to skip thirds is because thirds don't necessarily go with the half. Fourths naturally do, and you'll see why. So when you partition something into 4 equal parts, we usually try to find the half first, which we already know is 6. And then a fourth is actually a half of a half. So I'm going to come over to this side, and I'm going to find the middle of this half and draw my line, which ends up being right on this 3. And then over here on this side, this is half of the half. So 1/4 ends up equaling 3 inches. And each chunk is the unit fraction 1/4, or they're also known as quarters. So we have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, or 1/4, 2/4, 3/4 whole. And that makes sense if they're each 3 inches, because if we skip count by threes, 3, 6, 9, 12. It goes in 4 times. So every 3 inches is 1/4 of a foot. Now, if we were going to partition a circle or cookie or pizza or something into 4 equal parts, you're going to cut the in half, and then you're going to cut this half in half. And if you keep going side to side, it cuts this second half in half. So if we combine these fourths, we have 1/4, then we have another fourth. If you combine those two, that would be 2/4. You combine these 3, it would be 3/4, and then 4/4 would equal the whole. So if I shaded in my fourths, let's say we wanted to represent 3/4, you would shade in 1, 2, and 3. There's an example of 3/4. It kind of looks like our friend Pac-Man, doesn't it? Okay, so that's fourths or quarters. Now I'm going to skip eighths, even though we know eighths are half of a fourth, but eighths don't land on a whole number. We don't typically talk about eighths of a foot because they don't land on half. On a whole number. It would be like 1.5 and 1.5. So we're going to skip eighths, and now we're going to go back to thirds. And I think thirds, in my opinion, are the hardest ones to partition. What I always do is I find the half, but I don't make a mark. I just put two of my fingers next to each other, and I actually start to spread my fingers out at the same time. Whoa, it's zooming in. Hold on. I'm supposed to be drawing. I spread them out at the same time until I think I have made 3 equal parts. So if we take a look at it from here to here to here to here, that looks about equal. So that's why, oh, I didn't mean to erase all that. That looks about equal. So I'm going to leave those tick marks there. And maybe I'll draw them in how I was doing with the other ones with the white. So there I have, it looks, It looks like 3 equal parts to me. Okay. Now let's see how many inches that is. What number does that land on? 4 inches. So 1/3 of a foot equals 4 inches. And then should be another 4 inches. So that would be 2/3, right? It would be 8 inches. And then another 4 inches would be 3/3. And if we skip counted, 4, 8, 12. So 12 is turning out to be a pretty cool number. It can be divided into halves, it can be divided into fourths, it can be divided into thirds. Now, even partitioning a circle into thirds, though, is kind of tricky. I always thought, okay, well, let's do a Y. But the problem with thinking about a Y is a lot of times kids will make the mistake of making the Y where the arms are close together, like a typical Y. And then you can see that this middle chunk is much smaller than these two side chunks. But if you can make your Y where the arms are kind of spread out, that makes 3 equal parts. Okay. One day I had a student wearing a Jumpman shirt, and he pointed out that it looks very similar to the Jumpman. And if this arm is tilted slightly to the right, if this arm or his head was really long or something and went straight up, it kind of resembles 3 equal parts. And then the last thing, if you know a lot about cars, this is a Mercedes-Benz symbol. They used to have hood ornaments that would stick up from the cars when I was a kid. And it makes that logo makes 3 equal parts on the Mercedes-Benz. So those are the ways to remember how to do thirds. And then after you get your thirds, you can use your thirds to create your sixths. It's hard to say sixths without spitting on somebody. So you have to find thirds first, which we already know from doing the thirds up there is 4 and 8. And then you cut your thirds in half. And we have 6 equal parts. So 1/6 ends up equaling 2 inches. So every 2 inches. 1/6, 1/6. There would be 4/6, right? If we add them up. 5/6, 6/6. So if we skip counted by 6, or I mean by 2s, every 2 inches is 1/6. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So each one of these is a sixth. 1/6, 2/6, 3/6. So if I said how long is 5/6 of a foot? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You would know it would be 10 inches. And in order to partition a circle, we take our Y. The arms are wide enough. And then you're going to cut, just like we cut the thirds in half, we're going to cut these thirds in half. So this is going to go straight through. Each third got sliced in half, and now we have our 6 equal parts. And this was a representative of 3 equal parts. So that's partitioning. So if we come down here, we can kind of build what we did up there again. We know that 2 of these would make a whole. And then those are the halves. Then we'll go to thirds next, even though I don't like doing thirds in the same plane when I'm partitioning, but we'll go thirds next because that's the next largest fraction. So that's 3 equal parts. And then the next one is that we have up here is 4 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then also we have 6 equal parts. That's the next largest. So 6 of these. Maybe I'll start cloning. Okay, so 6 of those. And notice these are all equaling a whole. And then I even represented our 8 equal parts just to show you. Even though these don't land on a whole number for a out of inches from feet, but just for fun, this is where the 8s would show up on a fraction chart like we're building here. And the last one was one that we didn't really show up there, but it was like each inch was equivalent to a 12th, right? Every single inch was a 12th. And the 12ths are actually, oops, the 12ths are actually half of a 6th. So every one of those inches on the ruler, 1 inch was 1/12 of a foot, 2 inches were 2/12. Here I've just made 4/12. If I clone those 4/12, it's going to get us all the way to 8/12, which that should be equal to, these might be a little bit smaller. They're like overlapping or something, but they should be lining up with those 6 up there. And I think I have, 4/12 to go to get to the whole. So now I've made my chart. Each one of these 12/12 makes one whole. These 8/8 makes a whole. These 6/6 makes a whole. 4/4 make a whole. 3/3 and 2/2. And you can compare fractions now with this chart. Like if I said, what's larger, 2/3 or 3/4? Well, here's 1/3, here's 2/3. 2/3 would come from the left all the way to here, and 3/4 would go all the way to here. And you can see that 3/4 goes further than 2/3. So there's all types of comparing you can do. You can also find equivalent fractions where they line up. So we have 1/3 lines up straight with 2/6 and 4/12. Those are all equivalent fractions. So whenever there's a line of a vertical line where they line up perfectly, then you know that's equivalent. Those are equivalent fractions. So here's 1/2, 2/4, 3/6, 4/8, and 6/12. Those are equivalent. The thirds are the only ones on here that don't line up, don't have an equivalent fraction with half. And that's why thirds are the trickiest. All right, well, hopefully that was helpful today. And once again, you can come back here and check out the video if you have any questions.